thank you again for a chance to gather here. Thank you for a warm building to be able to gather in. And thank you for the gift of your word. We pray that as we study it and think about it, that you'd use it to shape us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's kind of start here. What have you heard about the mark of the beast? Have you heard about that?
Yes.
Yes. What have you
You
heard?
won't be able to buy or sell.
You won't be able to buy or sell. And it says that in there, yep. That's all.
I remember when I was younger, my dad would say, don't ever let anybody put a mark on your forehead.
Any forehead or any hand.
Yeah.
Yep.
That would be from the devil.
Yep. People are, okay. Yep. So you'll have people people will speculate on what it might be, right? And so some folks are worried about Neuralink from Elon Musk, which I think there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about them putting computer chips in your brain, but there'd be other things people are worried about other things. Well, keep that in mind as we go. It's I don't know. We'll see if we can figure out and get to the bottom of it. Just a reminder that we meet the next couple weeks here all in a row, so your weeks off are done. Your time to catch up reading is passed. But next week we'll be looking at Revelation chapter 15 and 16, and then the other. So you'll be reading those two, and instead of reading an Old Testament thing, I've got that handout for you on wrath and chaos and Revelation. And it's we'll cover that next week. I'll talk about it a little bit. But it's something where I want us to think about what is meant by God's wrath and how does that play out in the book of Revelation and what does that mean? Because there's some kind of crazy things here. So that's for next time. Just a reminder of where we are. We're in chapters 12, 13, and 14. And if you look on the breakdown of Revelation, it's the part that I labeled conflict. But we did the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets, and then we've got this conflict piece, and then next time when we cover it is the 7 bowls. And so it's this pause in between the 3 sets of 7. So that's kind of interesting. So that's where we're at in regards to the whole thing. And then after that is this kind of final judgment that happens that we'll talk about. So that's where we are within the whole deal. I wanted to just kind of give each chapter a heading to kind of give us a big picture. I think having big pictures of stuff is helpful in Revelation. And so this is a time of conflict where we see it played out in a couple different ways. Chapter 12 is the story about the dragon, a woman and the dragon. In chapter 13, we have the 2 beasts, the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. And that's where you get the mark of the beast is in there as well. And then chapter 14, you have 3 different things. You have 144,000 worshipers who are this kind of like holy army of God. You have 3 angels who each have a message. And then you have 2 harvests that are in chapter 14. So we'll kind of look at those as we go. Before we get into chapter 12, as we start to think about what's going on in chapter 12 and chapter 13, I want to do just a review. We talked about this last time, but I think this is helpful. The number 3.5. The number 3.5, you see it brought up in several different ways. Sometimes it'll say a time, times, and half a time. So a time, then times, and a half a time would be 3.5. Or you'll see it described as 42 months. 42 months would be 3.5 years. Or you'll see it described as 1,260 days, which is, you guessed it, 3.5 years. And so it's written in a bunch of different ways. What does this 3.5 mean? And in the book of Revelation, numbers are symbolic. They're telling us something. So when we see the number 12, we're meant to think about the people of God. Well, why do we think that? Well, what does 12 bring to mind from the Old Testament? 12 tribes, right? What does 12 bring to mind in the New Testament? 12 disciples. And so 12 tends to stand for the people of God. And when you have 12 times 12, it's kind of like saying all of the people of God. So that's where the 144,000 number comes in. Well, 3.5 means some things too. And to start with, we'll kind of think about it as it's found in Daniel. The big verse to kind of set this in our mind is Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. I heard him swear by the one who lives forever that it would be a time, 2 times, and a half a time, so it'd be 3.5. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be accomplished. And so you see during this time, 2.5 times during this 3.5 time period, the shattering of the people of God is happening, but that is going to come to an end. Again, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, and they shall be given into his power for a time, 2 times, and half a time. And so you get this sense where this number 3.5 is connected to the people of God under persecution. And you see this in different times. This was within the Jewish imagination, by the way, within their storytelling and stuff. The Babylonian siege and destruction of Jerusalem was roughly 3.5 years of siege. And the Maccabean revolt, after an attack by Antiochus Epiphanes, it took about 3.5 years. So this number was kind of ingrained into the Jewish psyche. I was thinking of numbers and kind of silliness and stuff that happens. If you have contact with younger kids, there's this thing going on 6, 7, right? And you don't even know what it means. But the thing that happens is anytime somebody says 6, 7, like everyone, oh my gosh, and they start doing this thing, and it's right. Well, what I want you to get from that is there's this thing where phrases or numbers or imagery that gets kind of into the psyche. Well, for the Jewish people, for the people who are reading this, when they hear the number 3.5, that's going to connect to persecution of God's people. So it's this time of persecution of God's people. Now 7 tends to kind of show a fullness of things, like a fullness of time. A week is 7 days. 3.5 is not that, is it? So the 3.5 is half of it. And so one of the things it says is that the 3.5 is not forever. And so just off the bat, we can say there's persecution on God's people, but it won't last forever. And so those are the things that I want us to kind of have in mind, that number kind of means those things and signals those things. We've already seen it in Revelation in chapter 11. In chapter 11, where John was told to measure the temple, and he said for 42 months the Gentiles would trample the outer court. And so the temple we talked about, and when we looked at that, the temple was, in the New Testament, we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so the temple was symbolic of the church and the people of God. And the Gentiles trampling it, there's 42 months of that sort of persecution. Then we get these witnesses who, for 1,260 days, testify, and they get persecuted. People don't like them. And then 3.5 days, the witnesses are lying dead. Well, again, you get this sense of this people against the people of God. And so you get these pictures in Revelation 11 of that. Well, as we look at the woman in the wilderness, we find that there's 3.5 connected with her, which is important as we kind of wonder, who is this woman and what's going on? So that's going to help us maybe understand this chapter. Chapter 12, the woman and the dragon. I'm going to preach on this a bit on Sunday. But if you look at the woman and the dragon, they say this: there's a great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child so that he might devour her as soon as it was born. And so you get this thing where you have the dragon who's going to be trying to devour this woman, and she's giving birth to a child. What story might this be about? Jesus. So the right answer in church is almost always Jesus, right? Yeah. So Jesus, who would be Jesus in this? The one being born, which would make the woman Mary. But this is, if you remember, I've said that symbols in Revelation can be multivalent, which means they can represent a few things at once. And so Mary is kind of one of those ideas that this woman is representing. But who else then might she represent?
Church.
So the church, that's good. And then who before that? He's a good guess, but not quite. The people of Israel. And so it's like the people of God. And so the people of Israel, in a way, the people of Israel gave birth to Christ. Like Christ came out of the lineage of David, of Judah. And so you have this, but it's this cosmic Christmas story where the woman is giving birth to this child, and as she's giving birth, the dragon comes and wants to eat the child as soon as it's born. She gave birth to a male child who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. That's a reference to Psalm 2, by the way, the rod of iron, the ruling the rod of iron. So she gives birth to a male child, but her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. So all of a sudden, so this is kind of weird too. The child is snatched away to heaven, to his throne. What's that describing? Crucifixion, what else? The ascension, resurrection. So crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. So it's kind of weird because in the Gospels, it's like you get this long told story of the passion and the crucifixion and then a resurrection account. But here, it's kind of this short thing, like he gets swept away. And what that does is it changes the focus onto the woman. But notice that as the son is born, he's snatched away. Now think of how that's described, because if you think of it from the dragon's perspective, when Jesus was crucified, what did that look like for him? Victory, right? By the way, the dragon is who? The devil, right? So the dragon's the devil. When Jesus is crucified, it looks like victory. He thinks, maybe I ate him. And it turns out he rose again and ascended in heaven, so he's snatched away. It's like, and then notice that, let's see, in verse 6, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that she can be nourished for 1,260 days. So that's 3.5, isn't it? So after Jesus ascends to heaven, she is swept into the wilderness. Where does the wilderness come into play? What's that about? What Bible story does that bring about? Moses, the 40 days. Well, so Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. Why was Jesus 40 days in the wilderness? Because temptation. And then what story does that go back to even further back? Israel and Moses in the wilderness. So the wilderness tends to be symbolic of where God's people are, and they're kind of tested in developing their faith. Okay? Like they're in the wilderness, everything is stripped away. And so you have to depend upon God. In fact, for the people in the wilderness, could they just get their own food? No. They had to have men. So who were they depending upon? Were they depending upon God every once in a while? No. Every day. Every day. Right? And so this is the wilderness is symbolic of that. And so who's the woman here after Jesus is ascended? It's like she's the church. And so so then you have this description of like Israel, and then out of Israel comes the Messiah who's then swept away, and then if she's the church and she's in the wilderness, and she's in the wilderness for 3.5 years, what does that then tell us? What is going on for the people of God during that 3.5 period? What does 3.5 mean again? Persecution. Right? So it's hard. So she's in the wilderness for 3.5 years, and then verse 7 picks up, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and there's no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down. That ancient serpent is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He is thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So there's two different ways to look at this, because if you remember in Revelation, it's not laid out in chronological order. So we get these weird things where like something will happen, and then it tells a story about something that happened before that. And so it's just giving us pictures. It's not giving us a timeline in reverse of what to expect. It's just saying, okay. So then there's two ways to look at this. Is this about an ancient rebellion of Satan where he was thrown out of the heavens? So that could be. What I tend to lean towards is, I think this is describing there was a significant event that happened connected to the child that changed the power that the devil had. What is the significant thing that happened with the child that changed the devil's power? He conquered death. Jesus died and rose again, which was a pretty big deal. In fact, as the church understands it, that's like the pivot point of history. We are in the last days. We're in the last days because the most important event in the history of the world has happened. Jesus Christ died for our sins and rose again, the most important event. And now we're in the period of time where we are awaiting his return. Okay? And so when Jesus did that, it was the heel that crushed the serpent's head. Satan is defeated. And so I think that what I tend to lean towards is this is a kind of a cosmic, comic book, crazy description of the battle. But notice even as it talks about the battle, a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated. Does it sound like it was even close? No, I mean, but they were defeated. I mean, that's, and, you know, if you watch The Lord of the Rings, it's a build-up for like a long thing of a battle, right? This is the opposite of that. Well, they fought and he was defeated. Like, it wasn't even close. Like, it wasn't even something, we don't even need to take a lot of words. Like, of course he wasn't going to win. Well, he was defeated by Christ, and then he was thrown down. And then you hear this loud voice in heaven saying, "Now have come salvation and power, the kingdom of our God, the authority of the Messiah." Again, this is victory language, which I would connect with Jesus and the cross. "For the accuser of our comrades has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God. But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. They didn't cling to life even in the face of death." How do the followers of Christ defeat Satan? What's it say in verse 11? By the blood of the Lamb. That means Jesus sacrificed for us. By the word of their testimony, by our faith. So when Christians are called to a holy war, in that sense, as it's described here, does that mean us going out with swords and killing snakes?
No.
So what is this saying to people who were trying to be faithful in the Roman Empire? It's saying you need to hold fast to your faith, even at the cost of your life, because that's how evil will be defeated. Now, for us who maybe aren't persecuted and feel like we have power, that's scary. But for people who don't have power and the bad guys are just crushing them, that's a word of encouragement and a word of saying, hold fast to the faith. And then in verse 12 it says, "Rejoice, you heavens and those who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and to the sea, for the devil has come down to you with great wrath because he knows his time is short." And so now we believe that the devil has been defeated. We believe that. But does that mean that he's just going to like sit back and say, "Well, you guys won"? How does it describe it? Great wrath. Just trying to sow destruction.
His whole purpose was to destroy.
It's just to destroy.
Christ.
Yeah. Even though he's lost, he just wants to destroy it because he has great wrath. So then you get in verse 13, "The dragon saw he'd been thrown down to the earth. He pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child." So again, now we have, this is kind of one of those things where it could either be Israel, the woman as Israel, or the woman as a church. And so you get kind of elements of both. The woman was given the two wings of the great eagle so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness. So it's kind of like being delivered from Egypt. But also where she was nourished for a time, times and half a time. And then from his mouth, the serpent poured out water like a river after the woman. And that could be kind of them passing through the Red Sea. But the other thing is these stories are kind of, they're similar to some stories that these folks would know in the first century, where there were like chaos monsters. Like Tiamat was this kind of dragon-like chaos monster, and water was associated with that chaos. And so I don't think the water is so much the Red Sea as it is like vomiting out the forces of chaos towards the church or towards the people of God, and then the earth swallows it up. They are delivered. And so you get this interesting thing where the woman, which would, again, I think it's helpful for us to think of it as the church, is cared for by God, even though there is persecution and pressure. And I think the reason this all is important to think about, because I keep saying, like, whatever this means, it had to mean something to those first people who read it. And those first people who read it were under pressure. And so think of how this would land for them. And part of it is this, and I've said this before. Imagine the temptation to just go along to get along. Imagine the temptation, if I just join this trade guild, then I can do my work, or I can have time, and I can have commerce with people, I can do trades, and I know I have to sacrifice to this idol, but I don't really believe that anyway. And so there's this whole kind of teaching of, hey, you can just compromise a little bit just to go along with stuff so that you can still kind of eat and not have the pressure and persecution and stuff. And so that would be a tempting thing, wouldn't it? Just compromise, and then not only will you not get killed, but they'll let you like buy and sell things and have a job.
So you can get the mark of the beast.
See, well, and so that's why it is connected to the. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Like, oh wait, that was a reality for them. That wasn't a future thing. That was a now thing. That if we, and so one of the things that these visions are doing is it's saying, I know some of you think this is harmless. Let me tell you what's going on in another way. Here's the other way to think about it. There's a dragon that's trying to devour you. The devil. These simple things you think are harmless. If you peel back the surface, there's a dragon there. Right? There is a holy war going on. And so you need to put all of your faith in God to take care of you, not to turn to these things. So that's chapter 12 then has this dragon and the woman, and it's this kind of battle that's going on. So then chapter 12 ends, and it kind of, sorry, I've got to do this quote. I think this is a good quote by Eugene Peterson, and he has a little commentary on Revelation called Reverse Thunder. He says it's St. John's spirit-appointed task to supplement the work of St. Matthew and St. Luke so that the nativity cannot be sentimentalized into coziness. I love that part. Like I love Christmas time and music. I was listening to Christmas music today, even though it's not even Thanksgiving. I love that stuff. But it is easy for us to make it overly sentimental, to make it like a Hallmark channel. Right? The nativity cannot be sentimentalized into coziness, nor domesticated into drabness, nor commercialized into worldliness. It is St. John's genius to take Jesus in a manger, attended by shepherds and wise men, and put him in the cosmos attacked by a dragon. The consequence to our faith is that we are fortified against intimidation. Our response to the nativity cannot be reduced to shutting the door against the wintry world, drinking hot chocolate and singing carols. Rather, we are to walk out of the door with, as one psalmist put it, high praises of God in our throats and two-edged swords in our hands. And so it's this cosmic thing, and it says what went on in the manger is not some like sentimental child story. It's holy war, like it's a cosmic battle, and we are in it. The last verse of chapter 12 is it's kind of like when you're watching a movie and there's going to be a sequel. It ends this way. So chapter 12, it seems like the woman, it says, then the dragon was angry with the woman in verse 17, and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. It's like, the war's going to continue. But then as the credits start to fade in, and the screen starts to fade out, and then it says this, then the dragon took a stand on the sand of the seashore. Boom, boom, boom. Like, oh no, right? Just when you think the bad guy maybe is handled, then the dragon takes a stand. And so it gives us foreshadowing to like, oh, there's going to be a problem here. This is just as the storytelling goes. And so in chapter 13 now, we get another way of looking at this battle between the people of God and the devil. I saw a beast rising out of the sea. First, Daniel chapter 7. When you read Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has this vision, and in the vision he sees 4 beasts. The first beast is a lion with eagle's wings. The second beast is a bear with tusks in its mouth. The third beast is a leopard with 4 bird wings and 4 heads, and I think the bird wings are plucked. And the fourth beast is terrifying, it has iron teeth, and it stomps on things. And so you get the sense this 4th beast is like somehow worse. Then he has 10 horns, and so the horns are, it's like the fullness of power. But then this 11th horn sprouts out and starts doing blasphemy and that sort of stuff. And so you have these weird visions, right? Well, the beasts are representing world powers. And so the beasts represent Babylon first, and then Persia, and then Alexander the Great, the Greeks, and then the Seleucid successors to Alexander the Great that even lead up to Rome. In fact, in this vision, it's kind of taking that fourth beast and melding him in with the other three there, and saying Rome is kind of the successor to all of that. The 11th horn in Daniel chapter 7, I think most commentators agree, is Antiochus Epiphanes, who was an absolutely horrible person, horrible, terrible ruler who persecuted the Jews in terrible ways. In fact, there's, let's see, in 1 Maccabees, which is, if you have a Bible with the Apocrypha, the Catholic Bible, but 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 59 to 60, it says, Antiochus Epiphanes, according to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, so the Jewish children, and their families, and those who circumcised them, and they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. And so that just gives you a sense of this guy was horrible. And so for people under persecution, which Daniel's visions are addressing people under persecution, this little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. His name like Epiphany is like a revelation of God. And so he was not one who had self-esteem issues. He was like, if you've seen me, I'm the revelation of God. And then he would like kill people horribly. Daniel 7, then you get the one like a son of man. Well, the Ancient of Days sits on the throne to judge. And the one like the son of man comes and gets the power. The reason that's powerful is if you were persecuted by some fellow like this, to know that at the end of the day there was going to be justice would be a big deal. And so that's in the background here as we get into chapter 13, which is a story of two beasts. These beasts come as a result of the dragon making a stand. And so this is the dragon making war on the faithful. This is how it looks. This is how it plays out. So this isn't something where we're like, chapter 12 comes first and chapter 13 second. Think of it as this is just another way of describing the war on the faithful from the dragon. The first beast is in verses 1 to 10. And you'll notice, if you read the description, it said in verse 1, it says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. Excuse me. Which, by the way, the dragon has, the red dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. So there's a similarity there. And on its horns were 10 diadems, or 10 crowns. On its heads were blasphemous names. The beast I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion. So do you remember those animals? If you go back, to Daniel 7, the first beast was like a lion, the second like a bear, the third like a leopard. Well, here we have the beast was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, its mouth like a lion. So it's borrowing from that imagery, isn't it? And one of the things that's going on there is if Daniel is saying this beast is like a world power, then this beast that's here would be a world power. Already you should know who, for the first readers of Revelation, who would be in mind then with the beast? Rome. Rome is the world power, right? That had come in and devoured everything. Which, by the way, think of how crazy this would be. We look back on it and we're like, well, yeah, they're persecuted. Of course they'd be. They were living in a world where they were literally worshiping Rome. So all of your friends and neighbors would be like, man, Rome's the best. Isn't Rome great? Pax Romana. Rome brought us peace. We should worship the emperor. Let's go. Hey, want to go burn some incense to Caesar with me? And then if you didn't, they would think, I don't trust you. So the whole world's like, yeah, Rome, we're going to worship Rome, all that stuff. And meanwhile, you get this thing, and you're maybe looking over your shoulder like, oh my gosh, I can't. It's not very subtle. For them, it would not be very subtle that he's saying, oh, no, Rome, this empire, it's like this evil beast. And so that's what's being described there in chapter 13. And the dragon gave its power and its throne and great authority. So it's literally saying, where is Rome getting its power from? The devil. Like that's so this isn't very subtle, is it? Right? It's like, I wonder how John feels about Rome. Like, you don't have to guess that. And then one of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. What is that about? And in amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. The death blow. There was one of the things going on around this time was, you may have heard of Caesar Nero, right? What's the most famous thing you probably heard about? Nero fiddled while Rome burned. You heard that?
Yeah.
And so there's speculation. I think a lot of historians think that there were the fires in Rome. Nero kind of allowed to happen. In fact, may have even set them in order to blame them on the Christians. Nero was psychotic. He would tie people up to posts and then light them on fire for lamps in his garden at night. Like, he was a horrible, horrible person. And so as he got crazier and crazier, he ended up, as he died by his own hand, by taking a dagger to his neck. And there's a thought here that this imagery is maybe referring to him because, when Elvis died, what happened shortly after Elvis died? What did people think?
He's still alive.
He's still alive. He's working at a McDonald's in some place in Tennessee or something, right? It was a similar thing with Nero. They were like, I think Nero's still around. And in fact, there was kind of like, he's like a boogeyman, like Nero might come back. And so there's this whole kind of, stories around that sort of thing. And so it's kind of thought that this would be referring to Nero, this kind of Nero-like figure who died and came back. However, it doesn't have to be specifically Nero. One of the things that it starts to say is, if the beast's head died and then came back, you'd start to ask yourself, is this thing invincible? Does that make sense? Like, it's on the one hand, in one way, it's like kind of looking at Nero and like he might come back. On the other hand, it's like, man, if the beast looks like it had a mortal wound, but then didn't, can it be defeated? Now, if you were being oppressed by Rome, wouldn't you start to think, are the bad guys just going to win forever? Is this invincible? And so you have the beast that has this mortal wound that's been healed. There's also a part of the time, if you look in your timeline from the introductory packet, there was a year where they had 4 emperors, and so it seemed like the empire might fall, but it doesn't fall. And so then it'd be like, did it receive a mortal wound? That could be another way of kind of seeing it. But I think the main thing is this kind of question of, is the beast invincible? And in fact, the people respond in verse 4 by, in verse 3 and 4, the whole earth followed the beast. Well, if you're like in the Roman Empire, that's what it seems like, isn't it? The whole world falls under Rome. The whole known world did for them. They worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who's like the beast? Who can fight against it? Who is like the beast? Well, the question, who is like the beast? Well, we notice that the beast has 10 horns and 7 heads. Who else had 10 horns and 7 heads? The dragon, who is the devil. So when they say, who is like the beast? The answer is, well, the devil. But this who is like the beast is also, it's like a mimicry of people saying, who is like our God? And so the beast is like trying to take God's spot. In fact, you see throughout this chapter especially, you see this, I'll call it a demonic parody of good. One of the things that's true about evil is evil cannot ever create something on its own. It always has to twist something. And so evil, death is not a thing in and of itself. You need life before there can be death. Even with sin, with gluttony, say the sin of gluttony, eating is not bad. feasting with people is good. And so, like, you have that good stuff, and when you twist it, that's when you get gluttony. When you take a good thing and point it towards the wrong ends, that sort of thing. Does that make sense? And so, since evil can never make its own thing, it always has to, like, do a mimicry or a twisting of a good thing. Well, when you say, who is like the beast, it's kind of like mocking the calls for who is like our God. But then also, if the beast's head looked like it had a mortal blow, but then it lived, what does that kind of sound like? The resurrection, doesn't it? It's like a demonic parody of the resurrection. In fact, and then you see these other things that are going on. When the beast looks like it was going to die and then is back alive, it leads people to worship the dragon. But when Jesus was dead and was raised from the dead, he leads people to worship who? God. Right? And so you see this again, you see this kind of twisting. Christ died to ransom people of every tribe and every nation. You see that in chapter 5, verse 9, where it says, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, because by his blood he ransomed people of every tribe and of every nation. But in verse 7, notice, what about the beast? It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. So whereas Christ sets people free of every tribe and nation, the beast enslaves people of every tribe and nation. The Lamb provokes praise to God. The beast provokes people to worship the dragon. And so you get this demonic parody of Christ, this demonic twisting of Christ. Who can defeat him? Who can defeat the beast? Who can defeat the devil? Well, we already have this answer from chapter 12. Right? He was defeated. We have Michael and his angels defeated him. But then when the child was snatched up, we know that Jesus defeated him. But then also it says, how did the faithful people defeat him? It says in verse 11, chapter 12, but they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So, who can defeat him? God can, in various ways. Would this be a thing that you would want to hear if you were under persecution? And then it says he's been given authority for 3.5 years. And so again, you get this sense of persecution, but it's also a sense of persecution that it has a time limit. It will end at some point. There's 2 responses to the beast. The whole world marvels at the beast because it appears invincible. The people of God, on the other hand, worship God and know that Christ has defeated the dragon. And this is, I think, maybe the biggest thing for chapters 12, 13, and 14 that I want you to take, and I'll come back to it again. Neutrality is not possible. You're in one of those 2 camps. You are either marveling at the beast because it appears invincible, or you're faithful to Christ and have been redeemed by the Lamb. Those are the 2 choices. There's not a third option. Those are the 2 choices. Neutrality is not possible. This has to be emphasized because there were people who kind of thought that either a third way or neutrality was possible. And so it's emphasizing, like, no, it's not. So that's the beast from the sea. The land beast, is called the false prophet later. Whoops, I didn't even go on I'm sorry. The land beast is verses 11 to 18. And I think I didn't change ignore that first thing there, the leopard, bear, and lion. I just didn't. I did a copy paste and I must not have saved it at the right time there. So anyway, the land beast is coming up, and it's called the false prophet later. It's called the false prophet in a couple different spots. Chapter 16, verse 13, chapter 19, verse 20, chapter 20, verse 10. And you notice that you've got the dragon, the sea beast, and the land beast. So that's how many. Where else do we have a power of three? The Trinity, right? And so you get this kind of demonic parody again of the Trinity. And so you get these three who are working together. The beast leads people to worship the first beast. And so I want you to kind of imagine who they would have seen this to be. It's called the false prophet. But what would lead, so the first beast would be Rome. Who was it that was leading people to worship Rome as Caesar? Well, they had a emperor cult. By cult, I don't mean like, I don't know, you're boarded up somewhere with a bunch of machine guns. I mean, like a group of worshipers. And so you would have, if you remember way back in the first class where we looked at stuff, in each of the cities, they would have different things like an altar to the Caesar, or they would have an emperor cult there, which would mean you'd have a priest to the Caesar, or that sort of stuff there. And so within these cities, within each of the 7 cities, there was some apparatus of Roman worship there. There was a place you could go and priests you could talk to that would help you worship the Caesar. Okay? And so when it says that the land beast leads people to worship the sea beast, well, if the sea beast is Rome, the land beast would be the imperial cult, the church, for lack of a better term, that would lead people to worship the Caesar, or the emperor. And then notice then he's able to, he had 2 horns like a lamb, spoke like a dragon. That's kind of chilling, isn't it? The 2 horns like a lamb. So in some ways, it's supposed to remind you of who? Jesus. But then it speaks like the devil. Yeah. So it's, the reason it's chilling is, just as an aside, are there ever things that come to you and are kind of like, no, I'd like to help you, but then when you get down to it, it's the voice of the devil? Does that make sense? A lot of sin works that way, I think. A lot of sin works that way. The temptation is, oh no, this will take care of you. This will be okay. An obvious thing that I often come back to with this sort of analogy is like drugs. With drugs, it's promising you, like, I'm going to take care of you. You will feel great. It's going to be awesome. But there are demonic chains behind it, the horns of the lamb and the voice of the dragon. It exercises authority on the first beast's behalf. It made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. Because remember Antipas, he wouldn't go along with this, and so what did they do to him? They killed him in Pergamum. He made the inhabitants worship the first beast. He performed great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of all. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet had lived. One of the things, I know within the dispensational reading of Revelation, they will look at this stuff and they'll say, there will be a time where a false prophet will arise and make you worship the Antichrist, and will make you worship idols that you ought not to worship, and will make you will deceive the inhabitants of the earth, and that sort of stuff. I would simply say, we don't have to wait for that to have happened. Like, this is something that was going on in the Roman Empire, where those folks were deceiving people and pointing them to worship Rome. But even today, you have people that are encouraging you to turn your heart away from God. I mean, this is just how it works. This is what the dragon does. This is what the devil does. Just calling you away from fidelity to the Lord and calling you towards some system. I think for us as Americans, it ought to make us a little nervous that the beasts that are described in Daniel and the beast that is described in Revelation are the world powers at the time. Because currently America is the world power. That doesn't mean that we have to be the beast, but it would say that in the past, the devil has worked through those sorts of things. And it would be I would say, especially as, I've talked about this in church before, but man, it seems like when I was younger, my dad could go to coffee at Fabiano's restaurant in Portland, and there were a group of guys who would sit with him, and believe it or not, they had a variety of opinions on politics. And what did they do the next day? They'd come back again. And that went on for a long time. But it seems to me over the last 10 years or whatever it is, that more and more friendships have been broken, families have been broken. Why is that? And I would suggest it's because in a post-Christian culture, politics have taken the place of the faith. It is its own religion. And what does religion do? It tells you what you're worth. It tells you how salvation comes. How are you saved in American politics? By voting for the right person, who will then do what? Everything you desire, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And so, now that's not to say that we ought not to be aware of and vote according to our best understanding and that sort of stuff. It is to say this: our salvation will never come from a political office. It will never come. Never. Never. Ever. Ever. And the pull to worship that system strikes me as all too similar to the pull that those folks were feeling back in Revelation. Does that make sense? And so it should make us alert and wanting to make sure we really focus ourselves on Christ above all things, because from him our salvation does come. All right. Then we get into the mark of the beast. And with the mark of the beast, it's on the bottom there, sorry, it's covered up with a cross. With the mark of the beast, what happens if you don't have the mark? You can't buy or sell, right? And where is the mark? Forehead or ear. And so those are, I'm going to just suggest, these are symbolic, and the mark of the beast is a way of telling us something else. And this is, if you remember, in chapter 7, there was the question of God's judgment is coming, and then it said, and who can stand? And then there were 144,000, and what had happened to them? They were sealed by God. Where were they sealed? On their forehead. In fact, if you look at chapter 14, they make an appearance again. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him were the 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. So God has sealed his people. As you have faith in Christ, you are sealed by the Spirit. That doesn't mean that God has written something on your forehead. This is a symbolic way of saying you are oriented. This is the seed of your being oriented towards God. Well, what does evil do? If God does something, it copies it, only poorly. And so what is the mark of the beast? It is a demonic copy, attempt to copy of what God has done. That's all it is. And so the mark of the beast, I would say, is not something we are waiting to happen. It is a way of describing when you have given yourself over to the devil. You are marked. And notice what it does. You are either marked by God or you're marked by the beast. Is there a third category? No. Because again, that's what Revelation is pushing us towards. It's saying you need to be sealed by God. You need to be marked by God. And then it says no one can tell, or can buy or sell who doesn't have the mark. But then also, so you get the situation where if you have the mark of the beast, then the beast is going to take care of you. You can buy or sell. But then what happens when God's judgment comes? Is it good for people with the mark of the beast? No. Because God's like, well, if you'd like the beast to take care of you, here's what that looks like. If you have the seal of God on you, what happens when you encounter the beast? Is that hard or easy? Hard, right? The beast is going to come after you, right? But what happens when God judges? You belong to him. Because what have you said? I want God to take care of me and not the beast. That's the choice. There's people who will say, I want God to take care of me, not the beast. And people who will say, I want the beast to take care of me, and not God. So this is what's going on. And one of the ways it plays out is for those folks, you know, we've already talked about the fact that when they read this, when they would have heard this, they would have immediately thought about all of the civic areas they could have joined if they would only worship an idol. And how if they didn't join that trade guild, or if they didn't, like, just as something as simple as if you're living by your neighbor, and I'm living by my neighbor, and I know Hal doesn't go down to the Caesar temple and doesn't burn incense. And I need someone to pour concrete for my driveway, and Hal pours concrete, but could I trust Hal? No. Why? He doesn't go worship Caesar. What kind of citizen is this guy? He's kind of sketchy. Sorry, not to pick on you. You didn't even know you poured concrete. Yeah, I did. But so you see that there's consequences. There's consequences for not plugging into those things. And that's just another way of saying. Now again, for the people that first received this, they would be tempted to think, hey, it's not that big a deal. If I just kind of go along with this, then I can plug in. And what these visions are saying is like, no, when you do that, you are sealed by the beast who's run by the devil. That's not the spot you want to be in. Like a lot of this is just saying like, hey, be awake. Be awake. Have faith. That sort of stuff. Dr. Koester says, the faith of many of the Christians in the 7 churches may have been more severely, though perhaps more subtly, challenged by economic pressure than by overt threats of violence. And so in other words, the economic pressure was a reality for more of the people than the overt threats of violence. Now that was there. They might just be killed for not worshiping Caesar, but the more common thing was these economic threats. And then it went on, the mark, what was the number? 666, right? So that what does that mean? Because it actually said, like in one sense, 7 is like God's number of perfection. And so 6 would be short of that. And so 3 6s would just be a way of saying like, just 3 short of perfection. 3, yeah. And so it's like this. So it's just a numerical way of saying. Then also connected, like 6 can be connected with man because mankind was created on the 6th day. And so it's like this number of falling short of God, or this number of focus on man instead of on God, or that sort of stuff. So the 666 could be that. But he also had to figure it out because it's a name. And there was this gematria. So there was this thing where they would somehow take the letters and then assign a numerical